healthcare is a completely different world, and language services need to figure out what its role is in this new space.
All right, welcome to Slator Pod again, another episode. Today, we welcome back Dipak Patel. For those of you who watched our emergency executive order episode a few months ago, you know Dipak. So he's the CEO of GLOBO, fast-growing language solutions integrator focused on healthcare, language services, tech, and AI. Hi, Dipak, and thanks so much for joining us again today.
Happy to be on. Excited for this conversation.
So again, for those who don't know where you're based, what part of the world are you recording this from today?
I am out of Boston, Massachusetts, 20 minutes outside of Boston.
Boston, Massachusetts. All right. So quick career recap. What got you into the world of language technology, language solutions, language AI?
It's been an interesting journey. I'm relatively new to the space for you. Engineer by background. Started my career in consulting at Accenture. I was a managing director there for about 15 years, consulted across healthcare. Worked with hospital systems, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies on everything from them launching new products to acquiring other companies to revamping their supply chain capabilities. Spent a lot of time in the US, but I spent about 8 months in Africa consulting for a nonprofit, and then about 5 months in Europe consulting for a biotech. Got tired of advising companies and them not always listening. So I went into the world of private equity. I was an operating partner at a private equity company that was investing in the revenue cycle space, which is all about how hospital systems bill and collect money, et cetera, et cetera. Did that for about 7 or 8 years, made a number of different investments. Still, something was missing, quite honestly. It just, at some point, I became a dad of 2 kids, and I was always thinking, when it's bring your dad into, school day, can you really explain what private equity is? Can you really explain what consulting is? Kids big. You're following up the firefighter, and then you're talking about private equity. It just doesn't have the same ring. And so I said I wanted to do something that, one, my kids would be proud of what I do. 2 is hopefully do something that moves healthcare in the right direction. And then 3, something that was easy to explain. And so I was actually looking at a number of different options. I met Gene Shriver, the founder of GLOBO, this language solutions company. I had no idea what it was. The only experience I had was I'm first generation. My mom was sick for about 8+ years, and she spoke English, but Hindi was her native tongue. And what was interesting was whenever I went with her to go visit a doctor, there were times where she would not get an interpreter and the experience was terrible. Times where she'd get a bad interpreter, the experience was worse. And times she'd get a great interpreter, it'd make a world of difference. But I had no idea this world existed until I met Gene, and that was in 2021. And, eventually Gene asked me to come on and help run GLOBO and take it to its next level. So yeah, I've been in this industry now for about 4 or 5 years.
Wow. All right. So 5 years ago, we had Gene on the podcast. So maybe tell us a bit about like top 3, 4, 5 things. What has changed since we had Gene on the pod? That was, I just checked before, it was September 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic.
Wow.
So yeah, top 3 things that have changed at GLOBO.
A couple of things. One is we've doubled down on focusing on healthcare. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to join GLOBO. I thought there was an opportunity to really evolve the way hospital systems use language services to create a better experience for their patients and clinicians. Number 2 is, I asked this question when I started at GLOBO. I said, can't you just use Google Translate to do the interpretation? Again, that was new to the space for you. And he was like, no, that makes no sense. You'll get it when you actually watch what our interpreters do. Technology has evolved since then, which I know we'll talk more about, but the coming of AI and using LLMs has made an impact in the industry and will continue to make an impact in the industry. And then I think the third thing, at least specifically in healthcare, is the industry is facing a lot of challenges in terms of just financial pressures, the fact that we're going to have a shortage of clinicians coming up in the future, the fact that we have an aging demographic population and we're trying to keep them healthy. And so I just think healthcare is a completely different world, and language services need to figure out what its role is in this new space. So those would be the 3 things that I think are different from 2020.
Also, like you've moved obviously very much towards tech. So you have what you call now platform and product. So let me just list the 3 that I see on the website. So GLOBO HQ, Connect, and Kai. So tell us a bit more about that before we start talking about the AI product, which I'm really keen to speak to you about.
HQ is essentially our platform where you can access our services, but really the point there is for administrators to access reporting, data, maybe if they want to do translation projects, things like that. So think of it like our back-end administrative platform. You got Connect, which is the actual app that sits on the iPad or the phone or the Android tablet where you can access interpretation services. And then you have Kai, which is our AI interpreter, which we, yes, launched earlier this year, which we're very excited about.
Before we go to Kat, just briefly for those who are not in the interpreting space, not in the healthcare space, like who would be like a user slash client slash decision maker for you, kind of a key important user that you have? Because, you know, especially for the Europeans, they sometimes don't understand just the size of like the US healthcare system, because it's all like kind of local here. I don't know, the local municipality runs the local hospital, etc. So how does this work in the US? And who would be your kind of core user slash decision makers?
So there's about 6,000 hospitals in the country. And then there's a number of independent physician practices, and there's a number of what we call outpatient clinics settings. Usually, language services will report up to, if they're lucky, a dedicated language service manager. Sometimes the hospital system doesn't have a dedicated person. Sometimes that person is wearing multiple hats. In terms of who influences the decisions, it's multiple people, Florian. It's everyone from that specific language service manager to maybe it's whoever's running procurement to whoever's running experience. So we have a role here in the U.S. of the chief patient experience officer, which is all about trying to figure out how do you improve the experience of patients. And then obviously clinicians have a huge say at the end of the day. And you know this stat, roughly 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people in the U.S. choose to speak a language other than English at home. And so those are the folks that really get help from offering interpretation services. And you think about it from a physician standpoint, it's anywhere from 1% to maybe 5% of their patient panel where they have to use these tools in order to better interact with these patients that want to communicate in a language other than English.
And currently, I guess a substantial part of your business remains with experts, linguists being patched into these conversations, while at the same time you are piloting certain AI capabilities. Would that be fair?
That's fair. I get this question all the time. Do you think AI is going to completely disintermediate this industry? And there's a world where you could use AI for interpretation. I'm not going to say no, because I have no idea what the future is going to look like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. I think that's impossible to say. I will say that we do not think that there's a world where you're going to be able to use AI for every type of interpretation here in the future. There's always going to be a role where you're going to need a human interpreter. It's a more complex type of conversation. Maybe the person is dealing with mental health issues. Maybe the person is wearing some sort of apparatus where you can't understand what they say. Maybe it's just a complex conversation where you can't risk using AI the way it is right now. One of the things I learned, Florian, over the last 5 years, and I think most people outside this industry don't have an appreciation for, I surely didn't, is an interpreter does more than just interpret, as you know. An interpreter serves 4 roles. Yes, they serve as a conduit from one language to the next. They also serve as a clarifier. I saw that when my mom was speaking to a doctor and the doctor would say something, and that could mean 2 or 3 different things. So before the interpreter interprets, they ask for clarification from the clinician. They serve as a cultural broker. Many times the doctor would ask my mom to do these things or eat this type of food, and the interpreter would interject saying, "Doctor, the patient's not going to do it based on their religion or background." And then they serve as an advocate, which is really important. They help the clinician understand if the patient might not be speaking up or something is off. And the reason why that is important is when you think about AI's role, AI needs to do more than just serve as a conduit from one language to the next. It needs to be able to serve in all 4 of these roles. With all that said, we view things from the lens of the patient journey. I think about, again, my mom's journey. It wasn't just whether or not she got a good interpreter when she saw the clinician in the ER at the hospital. It was when she was checking in at the front desk, or maybe she was admitted into the hospital and you have a nutritionist come and try and have a conversation about what to eat. Or it was when my dad got the bill afterwards and was trying to make sense of it. And if you look at the patient journey, there's gaps in terms of when we should be providing some sort of language service, whether it be interpretation or translation or what have you. That's not happening right now. And so our view is you could use technology to fill those gaps.
That seems like what you built Kai for, maybe now, like to fill those gaps. Maybe tell us a bit about first launch. I think you launched it within the US. Tell us a bit about language coverage, primary use cases. You just outlined a couple. You also ran a pilot, and then maybe something on kind of cost impact that you found from that pilot, from those results.
We've been on this journey, just to be clear, for 2 years. Right when ChatGPT first came out, we wanted to do research in terms of how good is off-the-shelf LLMs for language interpretation. And so what we did is we basically ran it through medical interpretation scenarios. And then we tested how good were the results using medically certified interpreters as well as third parties. And we published those research findings, I think it was a year ago, where it showed it wasn't very good. And this was for Spanish, by the way, not
Yeah.
the 300 plus languages and dialects across the US. It wasn't very good. However, what it did show us was it created a roadmap in terms of some of the things you would need to do, work on in order for it to work. And so we've been on this journey for a while. And then last year, we finally finished developing the prototype for Kai. We wanted something where we could actually test it in a real world setting. And then earlier this year, January 1st, we started to do pilots with a number of different hospital systems across the country. I think now we're on number 10. And in these pilots, what we do is we're deploying Kai in the app, and then we have a medically certified interpreter in the room while the clinician or person is using Kai. And the medically certified interpreter can do one of three things. One is they don't interject because Kai got everything perfect and there was no need to interject. Two is they have to interject because Kai got something so wrong that it changed the course of the conversation, and that's the last thing we want to do. Or three is Kai got something wrong, but not to the point where it impacted the conversation. We found the level of acceptability. And the reason why that was important was it's like I get this question a lot too, how is AI ever going to be good as a human interpreter? And the question I usually ask back is, well, there's no standard way of assessing what an acceptable human interpreter is, at least in the US for healthcare. We know that there's great interpreters. We know interpreters that are not so good. What we don't have is a standardized way of assessing quality across every interpretation. And so
Yeah.
I talked about my previous experience. I used to run a revenue cycle company on medical coding. And within the medical coding industry, there was a standardized way of assessing the quality of medical coding, meaning you would review X number of charts. This was the formula you would calculate to determine if the chart was correct or not. And then here was the score that meant it was acceptable or not. There's none of that in the US for healthcare for interpretation. And because we don't have that way of assessing what is acceptable for interpretation, it's hard to make the comment, is Kai or any sort of AI as good as a human? So the way we're approaching it is by running systematic pilots with multiple hospital systems across the country, where we're actually using a medically certified interpreter to assess how good Kai is. And then on top of that, we are surveying both the patient and the staff after using Kai. And we're doing it in the form of the NPS, Net Promoter Score. And so I think we've interpreted somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000, we call them messages across almost 1,000 sessions. And our Net Promoter Score is 60, meaning it's crazy. That's a really high Net Promoter Score. So people are happy, people are acceptable. We're doing it again in sessions where it's administrative in nature, it's not clinical, it's use cases where typically you're not using any sort of interpretation service.
In a sense, it's still in a pilot phase, right? So when would you expect it to become much more widely available, and maybe with a bunch of like things you need to click and to agree that maybe that certain preconditions are met when you're using the app? But when do you expect kind of wider deployment of this?
We already have 3 of the hospital systems that have expressed interest in wanting to use it. Come September, you'll officially be able to use Kai, meaning we'll be able to invoice for you. It's right now fully integrated into our app, meaning if you use Kai and you need to kick it off to a live human interpreter, you can kick it off to a live human interpreter. September, though, will be the formal launch. The other thing we're doing, Florian, is it's also about what's the outcome of using Kai versus not using Kai. And so we've also started to assess savings, not from a cost standpoint, but actually from a time standpoint. So I'll give you an example. For one hospital system, they would have nutritionists that would round in the hospital system and try and have a conversation with the patient in terms of nutrition, food needs, et cetera, et cetera. And they struggled having that conversation because they were trying to do it without any sort of interpreter. It didn't make sense to bring a in-person interpreter. It didn't make sense to try and find the iPad on wheels. So they would just try and suffer through trying to have that conversation. They viewed this as a really novel solution where they could have a more efficient conversation. And what we did was we essentially asked, how long was that conversation before using any sort of AI interpretation tool, TIE? And then how long was it after you use Kai? And in that scenario alone, we found about 20% time savings.
Did you also hear that maybe in those scenarios in the past, they would have just brought their own device in a way and maybe pulled out their cell phone and try to use Google Translate or something like that?
They didn't say that, but we know, I've seen it, that physicians and providers are still doing that across the country. And I guess the way I think about this, because I have a lot of friends that are doctors, if you don't have access to interpretation for whatever reason, you're going to try and do whatever you can to understand the patient, even if it's not perfect. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this industry, Florian, where we really think about it in terms of the experience of the patient. What is best for a patient? And at the end of the day, a patient wants some sort of effort made to try and communicate in their language. And what's unfortunate is we don't have the right set of tools to support that in every use case across the patient journey. And, I think about this industry, the only innovation that has really happened, I would say in the last 10 years, was this idea, instead of always using in-person interpreters, we're now going to use an iPad on wheels that's dedicated for interpretation, right? And so what we're trying to do at Global is trying to figure out what other tools, what other innovations can we bring to this space so that we can level up the experience of the patients. We're always thinking about things. How do you make the patient experience as well as the clinician experience better?
And you probably have to really make it fairly frictionless, because if there's too much friction, even though the tech's awesome, maybe people are going to be like, well, I don't want to do these 3 steps, just 2. But if it's just there and it's widely deployed and it's superior to whatever other app you have in your pocket, it's going to be used.
That's exactly right. You think about the world of just video interpretation right now, where you're accessing an interpreter through an iPad or some sort of tablet. Lots of times the way it works is when the clinician goes up to the iPad, they have to put in a bunch of information. They have to put their username, password, put the department, put the language, put maybe some sort of medical record number or some sort of thing so that they have data on that interaction. It's a lot of friction, right? If you're a doctor, why do I have to type in all this stuff in order to just access an interpreter? And this is where, again, we've made a big push in terms of integrating into EMRs so that you're able to access those interpreters with just one button, right? You already know the language, you have all that information.
Remove the friction. And you guys are also using AI for monitoring the quality of live calls of human interpreters, right?
That was another thing I found surprising. Whenever we are bidding on an opportunity to work for a hospital system, pretty much every hospital system asks the same thing as it relates to quality. They ask, how do you, vendor, monitor your own quality? And pretty much every vendor says the same thing. Well, we hire the best interpreters. We have a rigorous process for vetting the interpreters. And then what we will do is we'll listen in on a subsample of calls to determine whether or not that interaction went well or not. We're on a mission, and right now as far as I understand, we're the only company out there where you can understand the quality of every single call. And we think about it in terms of 3 buckets. The first one is relates to backgrounds and the way the interpreter looks on video calls. So we're using technology to make sure that there's a professional background, the interpreter is dressed appropriately, their head is in the right position. And the reason why this is important is if you're the patient, you don't know that interpreter works for Globo. You think that interpreter works for the hospital system. And how the interpreter works and how you view the interpreter is really important for the brand of the hospital system. So that's number one. The second thing we're about to roll out this summer is understanding if there's background noise or if the call drops on every single call. And the third thing, which we're very excited about, which is going to be released by the end of this year, is accuracy. So the ability to understand how accurate was every single call. What we want to be able to do is look at our customers and say, when you work with Globo, you truly understand the quality of every single call so that you can make an informed decision on how good our services are.
So when you're building this, there's a lot of components that are going into something like this. And a lot of these components would be provided by the big kind of what they call now hyperscalers, the Googles, the Microsofts, maybe like OpenAI. When you're technically building something like this, like how do you take this into account? Which components are you getting from something like Azure? Where do you kind of spend time custom coding? Like, yeah, how do you put all this together? Especially this is moving so quickly. Every day there's a new announcement of something, new mousetrap.
We're not in the market to build our own LLM, and we want to be flexible. So the way we do interpretation, it's a 3-step process: voice to text, text to text, text to speech. And for each of those 3, we've built our solution in a way where it's flexible. It can use not just an LLM, and some of those you can get a great result using some traditional machine translation tools, but it's been flexible across all 3. The real, I'd say, way we've improved on that is 3 ways. One is a lot of prompt engineering. And you know this, whenever you interact with any sort of LLM, how you ask the question gives you a different result. And so through these pilots, we've learned how to ask these questions in a way to get the best type of results. So prompt engineering is the first thing. The second thing is post-labeling, post-training. So even with our live quality for professional backgrounds, it's not 100% accurate. It's getting better and better. But we have a team that's monitoring, okay, what was the result of the live quality tool? Was it accurate or not? And if it was accurate, it's providing feedback to get the tool smarter and smarter. And then the third one is data, medical terminology, what have you. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future, because obviously there's a lot of sensitivity in terms of using the data that you get from interpretation. And so, we'll have to work through that in terms of how open hospital systems will be in terms of letting us or other companies use that type of data. For now, we've really been focused on a lot of prompt engineering, a lot of post-labeling, post-training.
This kind of speaks to, I recently read a blog post by, if you know him, Balaji Srinivasan. Like he was a Coinbase, I think CTO, but he's been like on every podcast under the sun for the past 10 years. But he sometimes great takes. This is a great take. So he says, AI moves all costs to prompting and verifying. I'm going to have to read this. Basically, today's AI only takes tasks middle to middle, not end to end. So all the business expenditure migrates towards the edges of prompting and verifying, even as AI speeds up the middle. Pretty much captures what you just said. Like, so the middle would be kind of the raw conversion, but you still need to make sure you get the prompt right, or prompt. I mean, in language interpreting, you could say almost the source language would be the prompt, but then you have an additional prompt on top. But then, verify at the end, either through kind of refining the data or maybe even having somebody to like some human in the loop, which you now still have, having these interpreters there. Right. I don't know. It works a little better for written translation, the analogy, I guess, but it might also work for spoken interpreting.
It does. I think it also talks to the complexity of using AI for interpretation. And this, the longer the conversation is, the harder it is for the AI to stay on track. At least that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Again, we're trying to use this to fill the gaps where interpretation should be happening and it's not happening. We don't see a world in the near term where you'll be able to use AI for those clinical conversations because of all the things we just talked about. And the other thing is, again, there's over 300 languages and dialects in the US, right? So if you're struggling with trying to make it work for Spanish, try doing it for Chinese or Dari or Pashto. It's even that much more difficult.
How have you seen this developing? Like any breakthroughs over the past 2 years, or is it still just like it's hard? It's very, very hard to get these systems to perform even close, like remotely close to how they do in Spanish or maybe German or whatever.
I think the jury is out. That's why we've been very systematic about running these pilots for you. I've seen a number of other companies that are launching, their AI interpreter app for hospital systems. And the question I always ask is, well, where have they done it before? How many sessions have they run through? What languages? How do they know it works? And we, again, at Globo, we believe that you'll be able to use AI for interpretation, a portion of it. We just want to make sure we're doing it in a way that's very thoughtful, that's research-based, because it could be a slippery slope. We're going to have more evidence of this next year. One of the things we're going to be doing is testing out more languages. We've been primarily focused on Spanish, but we're going to start testing it out for these other languages in the same manner, making sure that we have a medically certified interpreter that's watching as Kai operates. Because even from administrative, I was talking to a language service manager of a major hospital system, and he made the point, even an administrative conversation could slip into a clinical conversation.
Yeah.
And so nothing is black and white, which is why we have to be very careful about how we use this technology. But it shouldn't mean that we shy away and not test out the technology. I think that's been my biggest observation of this space. You have people that say you can't use AI, it's not going to work. And then you have people that say you can use AI for everything. And we're just trying to think that you probably are going to be able to use AI more and more the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We just want to make sure we approach it in a way that's very thoughtful, methodical, and really does no harm to either the patient or the clinician.
Like if I put on my analyst hat, industry observer hat, it's just interesting that it feels like you guys have so much niche and edge case knowledge, and also the ability to test this kind of in the wild, that it makes me doubt any startup that would say they've solved like medical interpreting with AI, because how could they even remotely get the access that you guys have? And you have the technical chops to actually build something like this. And then you have the additional edge of being able to deploy it, as I said in the wild, which no startup will ever have. And I doubt there is some way to build a technology that's vastly superior to anything you can build, because no startup can build the foundation model either, or something that outcompetes you on that base layer. So kind of from a business point of view, it's really interesting.
I selfishly agree with that statement as well. I think we've been doing this for 15 plus years. We understand the space. Even the conversation we had earlier, that interpreter serves more than just interpretation. They clarify, cultural broker, advocate. Most people don't think about this, and you would not think about this unless you've been in this industry for that long. I do think you're going to see different models though, Florian. I think you're going to recognize, more and more companies are going to recognize you can't have a standalone AI app, because you're going to have needs where you need to kick it off to a live interpreter. If you just look at the overall trends with hospital systems, they've trended to consolidating language service vendor. There was a time where they used multiple different vendors, and they realized it's just easier to do business with one or maybe two vendors. And so that leads me to believe you're probably going to have startup companies that might partner with human interpretation companies. You're going to have humanization companies that partner with sort of startup companies. I think that we're best positioned because we're trying to do both, right? We have both the technical chops as well as the experience to try and figure out how you integrate it together. The other thing I would say is security is going to be really, really important here. We're spending a lot of time to make sure, how do we ensure that none of that, nothing happens to that data, nothing happens to that information. We're spending a lot of time investing a lot of money to make sure we have third parties look at our processes and how we're storing the data. The moment you start using multiple different companies to try and patch together a solution, that leaves you open to potential issues, right?
So you are collecting a lot of data, or you would be in a position to collect a ton of data from all these interactions. Is that something that you could potentially, I don't know, refine and give some additional insights to the providers, to the healthcare providers, like beyond basically quote unquote just doing the service of language interpreting, but like adding some other things, like what are people speaking about? Are they happy? Are they not happy? I don't know. Any other insights you would get from these conversations?
We don't capture the data now. That is the data of the hospital systems. We do use redacted forms of data to improve the quality of our systems. What you talked about is at least the vision I have for GLOBO. We're not on a mission to be a language interpretation company for the next 10, 20 years. To me, what we're trying to solve for is, how do patients like my mom understand what the clinician is saying, and vice versa. So in order to do that, you need to do more than just interpret. And I think you and I talked about this example. There's times where I speak and understand English, and I'm talking to my doctor and I have no idea what the doctor is saying. So in order to do that, you have to do things like you said. How do you provide insight back to the clinician based on the words, the tone of voice of that specific language, to let that clinician know that patient doesn't understand what you're saying? And then how do you do the same thing for the patient so that you can have a conversation where both parties understand each other? Another non-AI example I'll give you is, when I started, there was discussion that actually I think we started. hey, you have to translate the discharge instructions. You can't just do it for Spanish. You need to do it for pretty much as many languages as possible, because at the end of the day, that's the instructions that's going to tell the patients what to do and not to do when they're home. Well, what about the portion of the population that's illiterate? So at Global, we said, well, what we need to do and what we do now is we create an audio file for those discharge instructions. So we're always viewing things in terms of how do we make sure the patient understands what is being communicated during every single step. And again, you could use technology to do this, right? But you need to do it in a way that's smart, that's calculated, that is tested. Because the last thing you want is there an error to happen. So my biggest fear is one of these, startup AI interpretation companies has an issue with the hospital system. It's all over the news, and then it gets shut down, right? I mean, I think that's a fear a lot of us have, and that's why we're trying to approach this in a very calculated manner. And I'll tell you, all the hospital systems we've worked with so far have appreciated. They love the fact that we're investing in having a medically certified interpreter in the room. They love the fact that we have other things to ensure that there's security, privacy, and that we're really trying to make sure we can use this technology in a safe way.
Yeah, about 4 or 5 months ago, we had you on the podcast with a couple other panelists here talking about the executive order by the Trump administration declaring English the national language, I believe, if I'm still correct. So have we seen anything coming down the, demand on the demand side, or has it kind of percolated through real life, or is it still kind of more of a vibe that's going through the country?
So we've seen a couple things. We have seen some movement in terms of some of the languages when they're actually using interpretation services. We actually see a little bit of a shift where it's happening more in the middle of the night, which is why we're wondering if they're accessing the ER in the middle of the night to avoid anything. We have seen with some of our customers, there has been a little bit of a decrease in terms of language interpretation services. Nothing to say it's because of what's happening, but it's something that we're starting to track. We've had conversations with a number of government-funded healthcare entities, FQHCs, where they're facing a lot of financial pressures, which impacts, all right, do I need to actually use in-person, on-site, or video interpretation? Can I use the cheaper audio interpretation? And they're just doing it to just survive, right? Because they only have so much funding. We have not seen, though, this idea that hospital systems or providers are not going to do interpretation because the government is less likely to enforce it. I think I mentioned that on the call. Yeah, clinicians and providers understand the value of it. But we do see some edge things happening, which, we're keeping our eye on.
More positively, you guys made a couple of lists again, the Inc. 5000, which we just covered last week. And then I saw today on your website also the Deloitte Technology Fast 500. So it looks like the big magazines and the big consulting companies are picking up on that growth. So how do you maintain growth like that over a long time? Because we came across, we being from Slator, like even 8 years ago, I think you were on these lists already, right? And those are percentage lists. So the longer you're there, the harder it gets to remain on that.
It's hard also when you're doing organically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like
I want to talk about that as well. Yeah, very few acquisitions, if any.
I think a couple things. We have a fabulous team. I mean, I say this, our team at Global has been through a lot professionally and personally over the last 5 years. You think about just coming out of COVID, but just we're a family at Globo, and all of us deal with things personally that we've all been through. And as a result, I say this all the time, everyone at this company would go to war with each other. And every day we're all motivated by the same thing, Florian. This space is not as good as it should be for patients. We need to do a better job for patients or clinicians. And the reason why that helps us grow is we're always trying to drive innovation. So I'll tell you, I think we were one of the first that really made a focus on connect times. When I got here, I surveyed a number of chief medical officers and chief nursing officers, and I asked them, what is your expectation of connect times? All of them said a minute. We said that was ridiculous. And so we made a focus effort to say you get an interpreter in 10 seconds or less. We're not there yet. For Spanish, we are. For non-Spanish, we're a little bit above 10 seconds. I'm starting to see more and more companies focus on the same thing, which is a good thing. We made a really big focus on understanding how do you provide language services across the patient journey. I see other companies starting to do the same thing. Great thing. At the end of the day, I think it's good if more and more people do this. And now really focus on live quality. If you and I talk a year from now, or 2 years from now, and the expectation is that every vendor needs to assess quality in every single call, we've done our job, right? Or 2 years from now, we understand that we are able to use some sort of AI tool to fill those gaps, and we have multiple companies offering that, we've done our job. So I think a lot of the growth is happening from the fact that we're always trying to challenge the way you provide language services. It's interesting, whenever you contract with the hospital system, Florian, it's usually a 3-year contract, and then you have like a couple year extensions. And we always say the same thing. Don't you want to partner with the company that's trying to figure out how the world is going to look like 5 years from now and really trying to introduce new solutions? And that's resonated with a lot of our customers and a lot of our wins.
You said a lot of it was organic, or most of it, the growth, but like there's two potential avenues to future growth. One would be acquisition. So what are your thoughts on that? And the second one, is anybody ever going to IPO in this industry? Like, what are your thoughts about that? Like, we've had like the last transaction was like Limebridge delisting in 2017 or something. So I don't know. What do you think about any company going public?
The industry is and you know this, you cover it better, more than me. The industry is a little bit in flux. You have all the translation companies trying to figure out the impact of AI, some of them going into the interpretation space. You have the interpretation companies trying to figure out how do you leverage AI to make their services bigger. I think we're going to see, I mean, we're still relatively small. If you look at the companies, at least in healthcare interpretation in the US, I mean, you have LanguageLine, right? They're big, part of a public company. And then you have a couple, you have Stratus now, AMN, they're a public company. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's another company at IPOs here at some point. I think the first thing we need to figure out is what role is technology and AI going to play in our space before we have confidence of anyone IPOing.
Interesting. And acquisition for now, not really on the table that much, or strategic ambiguity?
We have a lot to work on, and you know, it's all about focus. And you know, when I first got to Globo, we were working on like 15 different things. And I said, we got to focus on 5 things and make sure we do those 5 things really, really well. And for us right now, the couple of things we're really focused on is, one, continuing to deliver really good interpretation services, provide qualified interpretation services as quick as possible. Number 2 is to really continue to demonstrate the role that AI will play in delivering interpretation and translation services. And number 3 is pushing the industry to assessing quality on every single call. I really want there to be, maybe it's a year from now, a hospital system being able to properly assess a vendor, not just based on cost, not just based on maybe a 2-week pilot, but truly understand how well that service delivers quality, that company delivers quality.
You brought this up before, actually, and in previous conversations we had, that the lack of a kind of a standard quality framework. Whose job do you think it is to do that? Because if you did it and figured it out internally, you'd have to kind of open source it or something. But like, who should do that?
Well, right now we have an innovation council that consists of representation of hospital systems, not just global customers, but just any hospital system that's introduced. And we brought this topic up to them. I brought it to some of the groups out there saying, I understand the concern as it relates to AI. We need to have a standardized way of assessing quality. And so we haven't seen anyone push that to the degree that it is there across every hospital system. So the way we're thinking about it is we're working with all of our customers, especially as we deploy Kai, to say, this is how we're going to calculate quality. This is going to be the methodology. Here's what a good score looks like. Here's what a bad score looks like. And then as we continue to grow, the whole thinking is more and more hospital systems will adopt it. And then once you get over a certain threshold, Florian, then it sort of takes hold. And we're open. If anyone wants to partner with us to not just help define what this methodology is, but actually establish it in practice, we're open to partner with anyone, whether it be other hospital systems or other companies out there.
Call to action to end the podcast. This was very, very interesting. Thanks so much, Dipak, for taking the time today.
Thanks, Florian. I appreciate it.